Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give people time to digitally settle before we get going. Obviously, and please keep muted. Right. Well, hello, I'm Alexander Stevenson, the founder of Bloom, and welcome to the latest Bloom webinar. For those of you who are new to Bloom, we have a vetted roster of freelancers who all have extensive charity experience and can be hired by the hour, the day, the week or month for part-time project or interim work. So please get in touch with me if you'd like to learn more. Logistics for today, please stay muted, but also please add any questions via the chat box you have as we go along, and I'll do my best to lob them in as we go along or at the end if we have time. This is being recorded, so please don't write anything you wouldn't be happy to share with a wide audience. Onto the substance, I'm very pleased that we're being joined today by Nicole Martin. Amongst many other things, Nicole was recently the head of media for global children's charity Their World, where she secured coverage on Good Morning Britain, Sky News, ITV News, and local BBC News, as well as many newspapers and magazines, including the Times and the Financial Times. And she has huge experience and expertise in helping charities identify and tell stories that generate this sort of media attention and influence public opinion and drive change. Expertise which incidentally you can, of course, hire now via Bloom. Anyway, that's enough from me. Nicole, over to you.
Okay, let me share my screen. This is when everything goes wrong. Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Can you see me and the slides? Thanks so much, Alex, for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about how small charities can get media attention. Just to add a bit about me, I started my career in journalism, so I spent 10 years as a news reporter at the Daily Telegraph, where I was a general news reporter, social affairs correspondent, health correspondent, and I also was the media correspondent. I then moved into big agency life. I spent 10 years at MHP Communications, where I was in the corporate reputation team, and I was also part of the media unit. And then I decided to move in-house. And as Alex said, I spent 3 years as head of media at the global children's charity Their World. I'm going to speak from notes. I would love to say that I can speak off the cuff. So apologies if I move away a bit, but there's a lots to cover and I don't want to miss anything. So yes, so just to say that I know from my own experience how that PR can feel overwhelming when you're stretched for time and resource. I always feel like the comms is almost a bit of a dumping ground and people just asking you comms to do everything. But I hope at the end of this session you feel better equipped to deal with the media more effectively. So I'd like the session to be as interactive as possible. So as Alex said, please put any questions in the chat, and there'll also be time at the end for a short discussion if there are areas I haven't covered. So these are the how do I? I'm trying to go on to the next slide. There we go. Oh, that's about me. Sorry. I should have said actually at the moment I'm freelancing for a wide range of charities. I'm working for the Royal Society for Blind Children. I'm associate at Do Good PR, which is a PR agency that works with charities, and also working with some human rights advisors. Anyway, so what I'm going to cover today is I want to talk about how important strategic communications is, especially when you're a tiny team. I'm then going to go through what I see are the 3 key steps to effective media engagement. And finally, I want to just talk about some quick wins that you can do straight away to support your comms. First, let's just talk about some media truths and some myth busting. So I think it's really important that you understand the context in which you're operating. So you won't be surprised to hear that journalists are very, very busy. There's been savage cutbacks in newsrooms, which means there are fewer journalists covering more stories. They're bombarded with emails every day. I've spoken to a journalist this week who was saying, she gets hundreds of emails every week. So that means they spend seconds deciding whether to read your email or not, which means your subject line, your pitch could live or die by 10 words in a subject line. Lots of people think journalists don't want to cover only want to cover negative stories. That's definitely not the case. I actually got a email this week from a journalist at the Big Issue asking me, do you have a positive stories? We've got a slot in our magazine every week where we want to cover uplifting news. So for Charities, I imagine you're sitting on a kind of gold mine of stories. So don't be swayed by the idea that journalists only want to cover negative stories. You can't tell a journalist how to write a story, and you can't ask for copy approval. I'm probably going to say this a lot during this discussion, that you have to start thinking as a journalist. You have to think about what they want to write, how they're going to pitch their story to the media, to their editors, and what their audience wants to read. Also, finally, I'm not saying this because media is my specialism, but I strongly believe that PR and earned media still matters, whatever anyone says. I was told this week that 90% of what AI throws up is driven by content by earned media. So young people might not be actually buying newspapers or reading them online, but they're still accessing the information in them. And also the people in power, ministers, governments, government officials, decision makers are avid readers of traditional media. These outlets shape public discourse and set the agenda for what matters in policymaking circles. In many cases, if it's not in traditional media, it might as well not have happened. So I now want to talk about strategy. Now, strategy is a word I know that's bandied around a lot, but I think it's important that we talk about it. One of the biggest traps small charities fall into is trying to do everything. I feel like I can see you all nodding. Comms leads are often pulled in every direction. People asking you to promote an event, write a blog for a funder, do some social media about policy change. Very often, these requests come from well-meaning colleagues in other departments. The reality is that not every request deserves a comms response. When you say yes to everything, you're diluting your impact. You end up with a scattergun approach where comms becomes a to-do list and not a strategic tool. Your job is to protect your comms function from being a dumping ground for internal admin. Sorry, that sounds really harsh, but I've been there when you're inundated with requests. You need to champion a purpose-led approach where every piece of communications is aligned to your organization's strategic objectives. It's far better to do a few things strategically and exceptionally well than to spread yourself thin trying to do everything. If it doesn't serve a clear goal, it's really okay to say no. So what's the alternative to doing everything? Before you do a piece of comms, you should have a clear purpose behind it. You need to ask yourself, do we need to do this? Is it aligned with our organization's priorities? Or are we doing it out of habit, obligation, or internal pressure? For example, a staff member asked the comms team to write and publish a blog about a community gardening project your charity ran last month. It sounds harmless, it's very sweet, but you need to ask yourself, is this story going to support a strategic goal like fundraising, volunteer recruitment, or influencing policy? Or are we doing it because someone wants something for the website? If you're in the middle of a major donor appeal or a campaign, a feel-good blog, no matter how lovely, might not be the best use of your limited comms capacity right now. So you then need to ask yourself, if there is a strategic goal, you need to ask yourself, what are we hoping to achieve with this communication? Why are you doing it? Are we trying to raise funds, shift public opinion, influence local government, recruit 50 new volunteers? Once you know why you're doing something, you can then measure how successful it is. So you can set the KPIs, which are really important. You then need to think about your audience. Who are you going to reach? And please don't say the general public or everyone, because that just doesn't count. I've seen that on so many PR plans. We want to reach everyone. It doesn't work. It doesn't help you. You have to be as specific as possible. Donors age 55 plus, or parents of children with autism in Birmingham. The tighter the audience definition, the more powerful your story will be. And then you need to think about, what do you want them to feel, think, and do as a result of your communication? What's the tangible action that you want them to take? Do you want them to sign a petition, sign up to be a volunteer, or donate money? Okay, so these are the questions that you need to ask yourself every time you do a piece of comms. Now, this sounds really obvious.
Sorry, Nicole, can I quickly just butt in with a quick question from the previous one from Diane about what earned media is? What's the definition of earned media?
Earned media is when you don't pay for it. So it's you're pitching it to journalists, and journalists then decide whether they want to cover it, as opposed to paid media.
Very good.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't use jargon. Okay, so preparation is absolutely key if you don't have a lot of time and resource. I always encourage, in every job I've had, in every comms team I support, to create a forward planning calendar, like an Excel with work streams down one side and months on the top. And that allows you to map proactive and reactive opportunities for the year ahead. So you can be on the front foot and prepare for important milestones. For example, if you know that the government is going to make a particular policy announcement that affects your area, you need to put that on your forward planning calendar, because then you can prepare your statement that you're going to write, you can prepare the media list, and you can prepare your pitch note. To get coverage for that kind of reactive opportunity, you have to be first. Okay, it's about getting in journalists' inboxes before anyone else. It means teeing up your CEO so they can sign off the statement, and where possible, be available for interviews. So create that forward planning calendar. You can also put things like awareness days on there, or have a work stream for your own campaign, so you can see at a glance what's coming up in the year ahead. I would strongly recommend that you all create a key message document with clear messages and proof points. And this will help you to draft statements quickly when there's breaking news. It also kind of serves as a script when you're writing blogs or articles, but you have to make sure that message document is regularly updated with the most up-to-date figures and stats. I also think it's important to media train your spokespeople. You don't have to bring in an external agency, which can be expensive. You just need to sit down with them and to make sure they're aware of the charity's key messages for a particular campaign. Sit down and prepare them for tough questions. You have to always remember think about the worst possible question they might face, and then come up with lines to take. And also make sure they're comfortable with different kinds of interviews. Explain what a down the line interview is, a live, a pre-record. Are they comfortable doing a Zoom interview or an interview on their phone? Lots of charities think about PR when there's a fire to fight, or when someone says you should get this in the press. But successful media engagement needs really careful planning. I'm going to move on to the next section. I don't know if there's any questions before we move on.
Interestingly, another one about a phrase. What is down the line?
Oh, down the line interview is when you're literally sitting sometimes when you have media interviews, you're in a studio with a camera in front of you and an earpiece, and the producer's asking you questions, and you just have to look at the camera and answer the questions. There's no one in the room, which can be slightly off-putting. So it's important that you practice this with your spokespeople. Otherwise, what they start doing, which is really weird, you see them on TV, someone's going like, their eyes are looking all over the place, which means people aren't paying attention to what they're saying. The audience is just looking at their weird head movements. So it's important to kind of role play these scenarios with your spokespeople. But remember, if they do have an interview with a TV, this is your job, is to find out in advance what kind of interview they're going to be given. You can ask what their first question is likely to be. Your job is to prepare the spokespeople so there are no surprises. And don't be shy to ask for questions in advance. All the kind of TV journalists I've worked with are very, very happy to do that. They're not there to catch you out. Okay.
And a similar one is a question to what you mean by pitch note.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to actually I'm going to talk about this in the next section, but a pitch note is the kind of what you write to the journalist to sell your story. So, dear Alex, I'm contacting you from Cancer Research UK. Next week, we've got a new report coming up showing that blah, 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 blah. That's your pitch note. But I'm going to talk about this now. So the next bit, this is when I was talking about the message document. I tend to use a kind of message house template. So you put your kind of elevator, the main, what is the main message, and then your core messages under 3 different pillars, and then it's supported by proof points and like stats, case studies. So it means on one page, you have all the key messages that you need, either for a particular campaign, a particular interview, a story. There's other ways of doing it, but I tend to use that kind of message house template. Okay, so the 3 steps to effective media engagement. So there's 3 steps. You need to find a compelling story, you need to know who to pitch to, and you need to know how to pitch. So the first and arguably the most important step is finding a compelling story to pitch. This is where, as I said earlier, you have to think like a journalist. Just because your CEO or funder thinks it's interesting, it doesn't mean it is. So these different ways, this I've kind of summarized what I think a story could be. So journalists are trained to look for things that are the first, the biggest, the boldest, or breaking. So ask yourself, is one of your projects or initiative the first of its kind? Is it the only project of its kind in the region? Are you tackling an issue that historically has been ignored? So, for example, the first charity in Wales to offer housing and trauma support under one roof is an example. That's a story for local media. Do you have new data or surprising stat? Media outlets love new data, especially when they reveal a problem that most people didn't know about or show something getting worse or better. If you've commissioned new research, great. But even if you haven't, you can look at your own service data. Can you analyze internal trends? For example, I've made this up. Over 60% of young people referred to our helpline this year cited food insecurity, up from 40% this year. I also did a story last week with a charity about period inequality, and we surveyed secondary school teachers, and it found that quite a high proportion of teachers weren't allowing girls on their period to use the loos during classes. And one of the main reasons was because they were worried that kids would leave the class to vape. You know, that's really interesting. And it got lots of attention. Do you have a case study, someone with a powerful personal story? This is when you're all sitting on a gold mine. As you know, people connect with people, not programs or policies, which means that journalists are always on the lookout for stories of individuals that reflect a bigger theme. Again, this week, about this period poverty story, we had the research showing teachers weren't allowing the kids to use the loos at lunchtime during classes. And then we had an amazing case study of this 15-year-old who talked about how she had actually stopped going to school because she was too scared to go in when she had her period. And actually, it was the case study that dominated the story because it was a powerful human interest story. And the headline was, "I know people who have bled through their uniform during lessons." You know, that is a story. The data was part of it, but it was the case study that made it, that interested the journalists. Are you addressing a local issue? Local media loves local angles. So even if your work isn't national in scale, it might still have a local impact. At Their World, my last job, we did a lot of work with Ukrainian refugees, and we offered them remote lessons with their teachers back at home. And we had students all around the country logging in to talk to their teachers and to connect with their pupils. So for the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine, I interviewed all these students, and we had images of them, interviews, video, and we pitched them to the local media, and we got blanket coverage. So it's really important. And also, it's worth remembering, I'll show you some examples of this. If you pitch to a local paper, it does get national pickup. So the story again, period poverty, I pitched it to Wales Online because the case study was from Wales. Now, Wales Online is owned by Reach PLC, which also owns the Mirror. So the next day I got coverage in the Mirror, and I didn't even pitch it to the Mirror. So people can be a bit snooty about local media, but it does get picked up by the national media, and local media is owned by some of the national media. Finally, are you tapping into a local the news agenda? This is called news jacking. For example, if there's a conversation about childhood obesity and your charity just launched a free kids breakfast program, that's your angle. So if you go back to the forward planning calendar, you can map kind of big government policies around big issues and see if what you're doing can tap into that national issue supported by a case study. So this was the story I was talking about, the period poverty story. So it started off with Mail Online, and then we got the Daily Mirror. And you can see how it was the case study that really drove that story. And this was all from one pitch to a journalist working for a local paper. Now, you might think, well, I've got a plate of spaghetti on my screen. This is all about the angle of the story. Stories can have several strands. And I have to credit Rosie Taylor, who's a freelance journalist who does a brilliant Substack newsletter called Get Featured. I would strongly encourage you to sign up to that. She gives amazing advice for PRs about how to pitch to media. So it's called Get Featured, Rosie Taylor. And in one of her newsletters, she talked about this, how Tim Radford, who's an ex-Guardian science editor, said a story should only ever be about one thing. He compares a story concept to a messy place of spaghetti, and how you need to pull out the one clean strand. You want to focus on one angle, not 5 messages at once, and it's really hard. When I started journalism, when I was a graduate at the Daily Telegraph, I had a fantastic news editor, and when I struggled to know what the angle is, he always said to me, imagine you're running into a pub and you say, guess what, everyone? What is the line that you would say to attract attention? And I still use that exercise today. That is your angle. That is the headline for your press release. Because if you have a report, there can be loads of different angles. But what's the kind of like, oh my God, I didn't know that. If you were at a dinner party, you were at the pub, you saw someone in the street and said, I'm sitting on this report. Can you believe? What's that one angle that will get attention? And that is a good way to think about what the angle of the story is. So with the period story, it was like, guess what? Can you believe girls are bleeding through their uniforms because they're not allowed to go to the loo during lessons? And that's it. So think about spaghetti, putting the one strand, and that's your job. Oh, how do I go back? Oh, it's how to pick. Oh gosh, Alex, how do I go back? Oh no. Oh, sorry. This is not good. Sorry. And let's go back somehow. Okay, sorry. Got it. Okay, here we go. So pitching to the media. You've got your story, you've got your one strand spaghetti. Who do you pitch to? Now, spray and pray doesn't work, I'm afraid. This is when you just create your media list and you just throw it at everyone, thinking that it will stick. Look, I've done this before, and occasionally it works, but I definitely wouldn't advise it. You might get a few hits, but it's much better to think carefully about who you think will cover the story, and also what kind of pitch it is. Is it for print? Do you have great visuals for TV? Do you have great audio for radio? Is it a breaking story? Is it an embargoed story? Now, I'll explain what an embargoed story is. When you send, let's say, a press release on a Monday, and you say it's embargoed until Wednesday morning, which means journalists can't actually print the story until Wednesday morning. That's called an embargoed story. And I would strongly encourage embargoes because it gives journalists time to research the story. So you need to research the best publications and the journalists to target. I use a media database, but I know these can be expensive. If you can't afford one, it's really worth spending time researching journalists on LinkedIn, X. I know people don't use X so much, but a lot of journalists still post on there, and it has their email addresses. And please don't forget using freelancers. So freelancers, a load of freelancers out there who are after stories, and they will work hard to get your story published because they get paid per story. And also it's worth thinking about impact and where you want your story to be. People always, for example, people always think, I want to be on BBC Breakfast Sofa. That's the best place to be. I mean, it's a great target, but according to the latest industry figures, the places where you get the most reach and impact are, I bet you, if we had more time, I'll do a little poll here. It's the Today programme, 5 Live Breakfast, Nick Ferrari Breakfast, and Jeremy Vine's Radio 2 Lunchtime programme. So, you know, think about impact and reach. BBC Breakfast is great. Good Morning Britain is great, but think of other places where you're going to have lots of eyes and ears on your story. So, you know, you've got your story, you know who to pitch to, and how do you pitch the story? Okay, this is open to debate, I know. For me, email is still the best way to pitch a story. Journalists are really busy. It's unlikely they've got time to pick up the phone and listen to your pitch. Your subject line needs to be the headline, okay? Often journalists won't even look at the email. They'll look at the subject line of the email that will land in their phone usually. And that should summarize the headline. Think about the spaghetti strand, or what you would say when you run into the pub and get someone's attention. Indicate in the subject what the story is. So you'll see I've written here, it's an exclusive case study. Is it new research? I've put this is the embargo, Sun for Mun. That's a term that journalists will understand. It means a Sunday for Monday story. So it means if you pitch it on a Thursday, I don't know why they put Sun for Mun. It means they can't publish it until Monday morning. It could be Tuesday for Thursday, but you're indicating in the subject line when the journalist can publish the story. Okay, so it's not worth. Some people I see emails saying, a new report from Diabetes UK shows that 2 in 3 patients can't access drugs. Okay, no, you would say, you would start off saying, new research, 2 in 3 diabetes patients can't access life-saving drugs according to new research. The journalist is much more interested in the finding than who's actually issued the research. Okay. I hope that's clear. So summarize your subject line has to summarize the story. Where possible, personalize the email. So I'll put an example. Hi, Sarah. I saw your recent piece on food inequality. I've got a story that I thought you might be interested in. Don't waffle. This is, I mean, journalists will say this over and over again. Pitches should be succinct and punchy. And you should put, sorry, I can't see one slide. Yeah. Put your pitch in the body of the email, not as an attachment, and that includes your press release. Put the press release in the body of the email. Journalists don't like attachments, and make sure you include everything they need. So think about, what are you telling them? The who, what, when, why. Have you got photos? Have you got B-roll? B-roll is like film footage. Have you got a case study? You need to give them it's called the media package. You want to be as helpful as possible as you can for that journalist. What you don't want is to be coming back to you always and say, have you got this? Have you got that? Think about, before you pitch, have you got everything they need to cover the story? Sorry. Can't seem to. Sorry, I'm struggling. Oh.
A couple of questions while you're.
Okay.
Again, lots of like, what is a B-roll?
So I'll explain that. B-roll is raw video footage. So, for example, I'm doing some work with a charity called Race to Space, which is about preparing the kind of training the space engineers of the future. And they're doing this big competition in July. So before we pitch the story, we've got a videographer who's going to capture some B-roll, which is raw footage of the students firing these rockets. So when I pitch the story, I can give them a case study, and I can also say I've got some raw footage, I've got some B-roll of these students. And sometimes it's good enough to do that with an iPhone. iPhones are so good nowadays that it's just good to get some content that they'll be able to use either on TV, on their socials. I hope that explains it.
Excellent. Thanks.
And so, is there any more questions?
I think you've covered a lot of them as we've gone along anyway. But if there are more, we'll do at the end. Yeah.
I'm just giving an example of a bad pitch. Okay, this is actually a friend of mine got this, who's a journalist. Subject line: chat. I'm getting in touch on behalf of the organisation, which is a not-profit organisation. We're dedicated to supporting blah blah blah. It'd be great to have a chat on the phone or a coffee. You know, no, you'll never get a reply to that. What is the story? What is the spaghetti strand? Why would they want to speak to you? It's definitely not specific enough. This is on the left, I think, is a bad example, and on the right is the good example. So I've made this up. I'm writing on behalf of Helping Hands, a charity that supports vulnerable communities in the UK. We've been working on several projects to improve lives and would love you to meet our CEO. She's coming in London next week. Could we perhaps arrange a coffee? Like, what is the story? Look at the one on the right. Pitch: 1 in 5 teens in Scotland go to bed hungry. New report reveals. Dear Judith, personal. I'm contacting you from Helping Hands. So you're saying who you are. It's important. Next Wednesday, May 28th, we're releasing new research showing that 1 in 5 teenagers in Scotland are experiencing food insecurity. I can offer you, and then there you're listing, this is the media package, and I've copied the press release below. So can you see the difference? The one on the right is actually offering the journalist a story and all the elements that journalist needs to cover the story. On the left is just very bland, and there isn't a specific story in it. So, okay, quickly. I know I'm conscious you've got time. I know there's been some questions about press releases. So for me, definitely the press release is not dead, but they have to be well written. A press release really should read like a news story, not a piece of advertising or branded communication. Ideally, the journalist will copy and paste the story. So I don't necessarily have to go through all of these, but you need to decide what the story is. The journalists call it the top line. This is the spaghetti strand. Think about the triangle structure. So when you write a press release, you want the most interesting element of the story at the top, and then you trickle it down, because often they might just read the first 2 paragraphs. Use simple sentences, 1 idea per sentence, short words, no jargon, no acronyms. I often used to get press release saying a unique opportunity or an amazing opportunity. Just get rid of any redundant phrases. Often the unique opportunity isn't unique. So you just got to kind of strip back your story so the journalist understands what it is. Yeah, I've covered most of the rest of the things before. What you want is the journalist to look at it and think, I can just copy and paste it. And that's happened to me before, where it's literally, you know, they're so busy that if you can actually do the work for them and you've got all the elements in there, they'll just copy and paste it. So that's it. That's a really good lesson. So just the story checklist. So does your story have the so what factor? Will readers care? Will journalists care? Can you explain the story in layman's English? I think the Financial Times, their rule is that a 10-year-old child should be able to understand like the headline or the first paragraph, that kind of the language they're using. Do the journalists that you're pitching to cover the topic of the story? Does the subject line make a journalist want to open my email? Is the pitch short enough to not put a journalist off reading it? And have you created the media package? This is a good story checklist to follow. Okay, and very quickly, these are I just want to cover some quick wins, things that you can do to strengthen your PR game. I mean, these definitely aren't silver bullets, but they're easy ways to make your life easier and your comms more effective. So if budget permits, you know, think about securing external resource. At Their World, we worked quite a few times with a broadcast agency called Edible. to help us land broadcast coverage, high impact broadcast coverage, and it really helped. Broadcast Revolution is another agency. They have like deep trusted relationships with producers at all the broadcast outlets like BBC Breakfast, Sky News, LBC, and so many more. And they don't just send emails; they just hammer the phones, and they know how to pitch your story so it works for radio and TV. And it's not super expensive. So if you feel like you've got some extra budget, really think about using get an external resource. Now, we could do a whole session on AI. I know it's controversial, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that you use AI to write your press releases or pitch notes, because they don't work. For me, I think of AI as a co-pilot. You know, I'm a sole trader. It's like having a colleague to help me on the smaller tasks. So when I've had to put a Q&A document for a spokesperson based on a press release I've written, I've put my press release in ChatGPT and it's come up with a Q&A, which I've had to tinker with, but it's a first draft and it really helps. I've also used it to summarize big research papers. I've used it to test subject lines. So you could put a press release in ChatGPT and say, ask for 5 headline options, and you can choose the strongest. I use AI note taker, which when I'm interviewing people, which is really, really helpful. You can also ask it to role play a journalist and test your pitch, what questions they might ask, or also role play scenarios for media training sessions. Think about tapping into existing networks. You really don't have to go it alone. There are brilliant networks out there. I've used so Ask Charity is a brilliant one. This is a free service from Charity Comms, connecting journalists with charities, and what they'll do is you put your details in, and then you'll get an email from a journalist saying, "I'm looking to speak to someone who's been affected by diabetes, cancer, or whatever." So, and then you can actually learn. It's a good way to figure out what these journalists are covering, and you can build up a contact list. I'm recently got an opportunity for, I'm working with a Freudian psychoanalyst, and now she's been invited to writing 500 words for Woman's Own magazine, because they were looking for someone to write a column about, a health column, and she's written a book about how anger is making women unwell. Facebook groups are great. So I'm part of the #1 freelance media women Facebook group, which connects journalists and freelancers. But it's a great way, again, to pitch stories, and it's also where journalists ask if people can provide case studies. I'm also part of a WhatsApp group for heads of media on WhatsApp. Amazing, really helpful. It's a really safe place to ask questions and support. I would strongly recommend that you go join Charity Comms. They run free webinars and they have free training sessions. And also the Media Trust is a great place. And I'll repeat again that the Rosie Taylor's Get Featured newsletter on Substack is fantastic. So I think that's everything. Slightly over, but really more than happy to answer questions.
I mean, well, Nicole, thank you so much. There are various questions, but in many ways you covered most of them as we went along, and obviously all those jargon was really helpful. So I mean, given our time, I think we'll wrap it up there. And I just want to say thank you for sharing so much, so clearly in such a short space of time, both big and small. And there's loads that resonated with me. And yeah, I will think about shouting in a pub or taking a clean piece of spaghetti next time, whenever I need it. Oh, sorry. And I'm pleased to say it doesn't stop here. Nicole has also agreed to do a small number of free consultations for those who have specific issues they'd welcome some quick advice on. Details coming on the email about how you can sign up for that. It also includes a link if you want to chat with me about how Bloom can help generally. Please come to our next webinar on July the 4th with Felix Riley on how to bring your imagination to work. And thank you all again for coming and contributing, and obviously particular thanks to Nicole for giving us such a fantastic webinar. Thank you.
I covered a lot, so people can contact me and ask questions. Feel free. Thank you so much for joining.